Okay, phase two. And what I wanted to talk about was what John Paul Dorn, was asking about was alternative energy. Because I've talked a lot about this before. And basically, I've had an idea of near post scarcity. See, post scarcity is when you have a society that has abundant resources, so much that you can have anything. Basically, it works out into energy, materials, land, labor, and information. That's what it is. Oh, and let's talk about those things. Look what I made. This is just some of the things we have in our society, okay? It's just something I threw together. There's this little washer, and I don't know what it was. There's a point to this, by the way. There's this little washer, but it had a coating on it. Hopefully it's nothing nasty. But it seemed like a carbon coating for some reason. And this part is to a camera stand. And this part is to a cutting knife, a hobby blade, or one of those little razors. They're real cheap. But if you look at this, how hard would this be to make? And yet, one interesting thing on YouTube is you could go to about anything you could think of, and there's probably a video on YouTube about how it's made. Everything from bottles to trash cans to cars. For some reason, everyone loves to put up videos about how things are made. And they get a fair amount of views. But really, it's fascinating watching all the machinery work, how it's all put together, various things you've never thought of. If you've ever wondered how they do that, this is a good example of that is a good example of where you can go. But it's also an example of the resources we have and the industry that powers it. Once you begin to understand how mass production works and how cheaply they put stuff out and how it all goes in its cycle from raw materials to manufacturing to consumer use to disposal and then to landfills, with only some of it going to recycling. That's why I support thermal depolymerization. If you look up thermal depolymerization, it flopped. It flopped because it tried to compete with cheap oil. But the reason it failed, well, one is because it was on a strict competitive basis, and two, it was trying to compete with an industry that is already well established and is completely wrong. Our oil industry is completely backwards of what we need in society. And I think thermal depolymerization, which is basically a procedure to take anything of hydrocarbons, which is organics and plastics, and put them in a process that will create biooil. Now, what's great about bio-oil? It's non-polluting to make. You don't have to use it in as a fuel source for vehicles. And without the need of long lines of infrastructure, you don't need a lot of fuel. You see, that's one thing about our industry, is that the reason they have comparative advantage and all these other things is because certain things are in season and other things are just cheaply made by foreign labor that we supply the cheap products from. And cheap power, which is oil, which is the best thing in the world for, I don't know why I get all clogged up, but it's the cheapest, most easily resourced material to use for storage and, well, not, I'm going to say production, but production and consumption of a material to energy. It really is. But the problem with it is that it has impurities in it. Now, when you go into bio-oil, biodiesel, whatnot, it doesn't have these impurities because when you process bio-oil, bio-waste, it actually takes those impurities out. So all that means is it's letting off greenhouse energy. And when it takes off greenhouse energy, what that does is that it does actually increase global warming, but it does not add the pollutants back into society. If you use central localized electrical grids that can be supplemented by cheap plastic materials used to make solar, both solar heating and solar electricity, and wind through turbines to augment this energy grid. See, they want these super grids, and I just, and they're completely vulnerable to terrorism and displacement and actually globalization, because if you look at like some of the plans in the sub-Sahara, are the people in the sub-Sahara going to benefit from those resources, or is it just going to be more of the same? I hate using that political term because it's a term I don't appreciate. But do we really need that? Or do we need localized energy? Because you see, if you can close those lines of commerce, if you can create a renewable energy source that's very close to each other, then you create a situation where you go from recyclable, reclamated materials to energy to manufacturing to use to waste and back to energy. It's not a perpetual wheel. It doesn't keep going forever. But it does have a feed-in. And the feed-in is the sun. Not just solar power, but biomaterials. Basically, the crops. There are things called food banks, which are like skyscrapers. But they're hydroponic skyscrapers, where they take a limited amount of space and they create food on each level. And what that means is that you can grow necessary foods for local consumption at reasonable prices out of season. And therefore, you don't have to have long lines of commerce for ag materials or big plastic domes, big greenhouses. And if that's possible, then you don't need the long lines of commerce. That's one commerce line cut. And another commerce line is cut is with the biooil. Because, you might say, well, how are you going to grow all your biooil? That doesn't make sense. Well, it doesn't make sense if you grow crops that will displace wildlife or wild areas. But if you have a natural subsidy system that takes crops that are already needed to be destroyed because there's too much of one thing that a farmer can't make any money from. See, because farmers destroy food all the time. The government pays farmers to destroy material. That's energy wasting energy. When you could, with biowaste and thermal depolymerization, actually recoup that energy in a subsidy system where the best crops go into the markets and the substandard crops, oh, I hate that, but what can you do? Go into less, and therefore they actually go into biowaste, and the farmer still gets a natural subsidy for a useful product, biomass. Not to mention all the diseases that happen with wildlife and other things like that. And there's even applications, if someone would so choose, for biowaste, and that includes remains. If you want to delve into the subject of cadaver politics, now, someone might find that offensive, and rightly so, but there can be moral safeguards put into place so that a profit for perishing isn't put into a medical industry standard. We've all heard the story about the cadaver bin, where all the excess body parts were all put together and someone put them in the back of a dumpster. You'd really have no cadaver rights unless you have a plan with a mortician or some kind of insurance. And if you're low income, you don't have those guarantees. Never forget that. Especially the way the state controls your right of how you choose to have your remains taken care of. There's no more potter's graves anymore. There's medical labs, medical seminars, and anything else they wish to do with you. Really. So in any case, there's one more place besides manufacturing where a waste stream can be reclaimed. And that's something else that food gets recycled from. And that's our water reclamation systems, our sewer lines. all the things that go down the drain or down the toilet can actually be made into power. All those water plants, all those friggin' things that pollute the rivers can actually go instead to creating its useful biomass. It can actually be made to cleanly and, to clean electrical generation. And with all these resources becoming a closed loop, you will have a society that again goes from big sprawling metropolises to more homogeneous individual townships and warrens that can be self-supporting, because they'll have the energy and the resources to actually create localized jobs. I think that is completely the right way to go. But there will be some sacrifices. Some of these sacrifices will be the problem of metal. Glass, although this is plastic. I'm sure. It might be a thin sheet of mercury. Metal, glass, and ceramics. Because those are the three things you can't use bio-waste on, because they're all minerals. You can use animal, you can use vegetable, but you can't, and you can use plastics, but you can't use minerals. Well, at least non-hydrocarbon minerals, like cement, like brick, like glass, you can use wood, but it's not very useful. Things with high cellulose are practically, they're recyclable, but they're almost not worth it. So, that's the solution. Anything that can be fatty and have a great ability to turn into a short range hydrocarbon, an 18 string carbon base, 18 atoms of carbon, can be recycled. Now, once you look around and see all that, you can realize that it will be very simple to set up a localized reclamation grid. And from there, we can have very easy, near, not total, because it does have limitations, but a very near post-scarcity, a near scarcity society. Because if one warren gets too crowded, you just start up another one. The only limitation will be land. So there'll have to be limitations on population, or at least immigration. That's why I'm always talking about reverse immigration, because one thing you do need is area. And this could apply to any terrain, just about any terrain. All you'd have to do is adjust it for your climatic condition. In the desert, it'd be more solar. And with solar panels, they would create shade, and maybe near an ocean, you can have the energy to desaltify water. I'm not sure desaltify is the right word, but desolidify. And therefore, you could create growth that way. Or create the growing tanks, food banks, and other things like solar chimneys. Solar chimneys are areas where you have a huge glass dome on the bottom and a very large tube on the top, and that creates an updraft that creates energy from practically nothing, just solar convection. So you see, there are near post-scarcity solutions, and this is always what I'm talking about, and this is part of my view on social deregulation also, because in a way that's kind of the politics of this near post-scarcity techno agrarian. See, because it's futurist, so it's techno, but it's agrarian because it's mostly to do with plants, and because that's basically what will fuel the majority of the biomass is the food systems around it that will create the energy. So there will be a large rural, mid-sized suburban, and very small urban center, sort of like a bullseye or a dartboard. A dartboard would be a very good example. That would be practically the model of how a city, district, and everything should be run. The outskirts are the energy generation plants. The long lines in are the growing fields. The middle parts are the suburban areas. And the core, the small little bullseye that you hit that dart on, is the central planning area and, well, not the power reclamation, but the urban area, the metropolis, the area where all the commerce and all the art and all the fancy hoo-ha stuff goes on. You know, the urbanites, because you'll always have urbanites, and they'll have to be there, the central planners, the builders, the dreamers, the ivory tower intellects. You know, let them be in the center and do what they want. You know, but we shouldn't have rolling asphalt jungles. They can live in their crystal ivory towers. And that's the way it should be. Now, is that statist? Economically, yeah, you know, it's kind of scary, but hopefully it's completely egalitarian because of all the resources that would be released. Now, that's my idea of the Arcadia initiative. That's the whole basis of everything. And frankly, even though it's probably wrong on many levels, that's my pipe dream, and that's why I've been spouting off about Republicus and friggin' how politics is completely off its friggin' rocker, and why I'm having so many problems with all these friggin' left-right issues that are going on. I mean, it's completely friggin' crazy, you know? Oh, we gotta help the people over there. Oh, we gotta help the people over there. Oh, you know, we gotta let everybody in. No, we gotta keep them out. No, we gotta send business over there. The left and the right are insane off their ass. Okay? Or, of course, here's some guy in his bedroom going, I have the solution for the world! Ha ha ha! It's techno agrarian. Whatever. It's the Arcadia initiative. Okay, it's retro futurist. And what the hell? That's Republicus, and that's the dream.